Hello students, in this video we will talk about constructor pattern. So in the factory pattern our function name was not really involved in anything. Okay, so we basically created an empty object and then we attached everything to this object and returned that object. But in constructor pattern we do not make use of this empty object. Okay, rather we attach everything to the employee function itself. Okay, so rather than saying temp dot employee id, we will say this dot employee id. Okay, and this will basically refer to the current object. Okay, so here again I will say it as this and this. Okay, so basically I will not be writing it again. Almost all the code remains same, so just I'll be making changes that are required. And here we will not be returning anything. Okay, and everything else will be attached to this particular function. Okay, so let me move a few things up. Okay, so that's it. That's how you define a constructor pattern. Okay, so basically you have the different properties and you have different methods or behaviors, and everything is attached to this particular thing. Okay, but and again if you see the instantiation, okay, the instantiation is also quite similar with respect to your factory pattern. Now if you try to execute, okay, so let me go to my dev tools. Okay, and let me go to my console tab, and if you try to execute, what happens is that it says that cannot read property about me, okay, of undefined. So basically if you are not actually pointing to a real object as the way you are saying, okay, so that's why you need to have a new keyword. Okay, so basically this is a constructor pattern. Okay, and this is, since this is a constructor pattern, you basically need to create an object. Okay, entire object, and then point to that object. Okay, so if you are doing like this, only then your emp1 is pointing to emp1 is pointing to can point your employee id and this property. Okay, so here I will change this to emp2. Okay, so I hope it is clear. Earlier we were not using that. That's basically because earlier we were only calling the method or the function. Okay, and that function itself was returning an object. Okay, and since this was pointing directly to the temp object, I can directly say emp1 dot function and retrieve its functionality. Okay, but now I'm not getting anything back. See, if I do not say new, what happens is that it is just calling the function. Okay, that's it, and nothing. It's not returning anything. It's returning undefined. Okay, so basically it's returning undefined. So emp1 becomes undefined, and that's why it's saying cannot read property about me of undefined. Undefined is emp1. Okay, so here we are basically using the constructor. So you need to say new. Okay, so only then this entire new means actually creating an object. Okay, so if you're saying new of something, it's like you're creating an object. So now an object is assigned to this emp1, but not a temp of this, but just a normal thing. Okay, normal function. So it's not it's any other object, but not temp. And now it can use emp1 to basically retrieve whatever it wants. Okay, so now run the code and let's see it is coming as expected. Okay, now we will look at the prototype pattern for object creation. Okay, so let me go to my JSFidel and let's first write the code for prototype model. Okay, prototype pattern. Okay, so let me remove all these properties, okay, which were as part of your function, and put them outside. Okay, see, the problem with the constructor pattern is that if I have 100 different employees, okay, this function will be, the code for this function will be created 100 different times. Okay, which is not a necessary thing, or it's a wastage. So to avoid the wastage, we can go with a prototype pattern. Okay, so what prototype pattern does is that, okay, instead of creating 100 different functions, if you are creating 100 different objects, what happens is that it creates only one um, common function. Okay, and the subsequent objects will use that common function. Okay, so to make use of such a scenario, such a thing, you need to use a prototype pattern. Okay, and how you use prototype pattern is that you use the function name. Okay, and then you say dot prototype. Okay, so if you say dot prototype, it means that this employee ID is within a common pool, and it is not created as many times as um, the objects are created. Okay, so basically rather than attaching it to the function, okay, we are attaching it to the common pool. Okay, so this dot employee dot prototype. Okay, so that's how it works. Okay, so since we have moved this out of the function, we do not require these three different parameters anymore. Okay, and here it cannot be id. Here what we do is we give the default values that it can take. For example, if the objects that use this prototype, this common pool, did not specify any value, okay, it will use the value from the prototype. Okay, so these are kind of the default values. So here I would say employee id is 999 is the default value. Okay, and the name, if someone is not giving the name, probably I would say undefined. Okay, and if there is no department, again I will say it as undefined. Okay, okay, so all these three different properties will not be part of the function but rather outside it. Okay, and even this one, okay, will not be part of the function. Okay, so in fact the function will be pretty much empty, and even this will not be part of the function, and even this should be attached to the prototype rather than this. Okay, so employee dot prototype dot about me is nothing but it's a function, and let me close this. Okay, so this function is ending here. Yeah, so if you see, we have removed all the properties and all the different methods from this function and put it outside and attached it to a employee prototype. Okay, so now let's see how to go about calling that. Okay, so you can say where employee1 is nothing but a new employee. Okay, so basically you need to invoke the employee constructor. Still we are invoking the employee constructor, so this basically throws up an object. Okay, so using that, what you can do is you can access the prototype and set the value. Okay, so I will say emp1 dot employee id is nothing but I will say it's 2. Okay, emp1 dot employee name is Ravi. Okay, and emp1 dot department name is nothing but IT. Okay, so that's how you instantiate. Okay, so once you do that, you can always go and get a print of that. So to print the value, we again say emp1 dot about me. Okay, so emp1 dot about me. Remember that these stuff will not throw error, and these stuff still works, because even if this function is not having them, because outside of the function anyway we have attached it to this variable, and we have used the prototype variable to attach, which basically means it is a common one. Okay, so let's go to Chrome Dev Tools and try to run it. Okay, so let me close everything. Okay, and let me run the solution, and here you see I get the expected output. Okay, so what would happen if I'm not giving any value? Okay, so for example, this particular thing I'm not giving it. Okay, so what would happen now? The thing that would happen is, since we are not specifying any employee ID specifically, it will take the employee ID from the prototype. Okay, so Ravi will get an employee ID of 999. Okay, so let's run the code, and you see that Ravi gets an employee ID of 999. Okay, so let's put that back in here. So to check whether a particular property belongs to your function, what you can do is, you can say console dot log. Okay, and within the console dot log statement, you can basically check whether this employee ID, okay, belongs to your person 1. Okay, rather, oh sorry, employee 1. Okay, so emp1. Okay, so now what I will do is I will cut this away. Okay, so now let me delete this and run. Okay, so here I'm getting it as true. The reason is, even though employee ID is not initialized within my emp1, it is available as part of the prototype. Okay, since it is available as part of the prototype, it is saying that this employee ID is available in this variable. Okay, but if you give any other variable, for example age, okay, which is not within the prototype as well, and run the solution, you should get a false. Okay, so now to check whether this property is emp1's own property or it is coming from your prototype, what you can do is you can use another function. Okay, so console.log, and within console.log you can check whether emp1 dot has own property. Okay, so has own property. Okay, so within this function you need to basically pass the name of the property. Okay, so whether I'm checking emp1 has the own property employee ID. Okay, here if you see, employee ID is not available within emp1, so basically we should get a false. Okay, basically I need to remove this because we are getting two falses. Okay, so we should get a false. Okay, but if you are giving a property that emp1 is indeed having, then you will get a true. Okay, because this property is available within your emp1. So the next pattern that we will look at is the dynamic prototype pattern. Okay, the dynamic prototype pattern of object creation, which is very similar to your prototype. Okay, but in this pattern, dynamic prototype, what we do is we go back to the constructor model of variable instantiation. Okay, so basically we pass employee ID and name and department ID within as my parameter. Okay, so employee ID, employee name, and department name. Okay, so here what I will do is I will assign it to employee ID and I'll assign it to employee name. So basically if you see the properties or the variables, okay, the data for the particular class or function, we basically move to the constructor pattern. Okay, so it is similar to your constructor pattern, but your function, even your function will be within this function. Okay, so even within this function, but this function will still be belonging to the prototype, and this function will only be instantiated if it is not really available. Okay, so for example what I'm saying is, if let me check the type of this function. Okay, so this dot about me. Okay, so for example this dot about me is not a function. Okay, so if you say if this is not a function, then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go and create this function. Okay, so if this is not a function, I'm gonna go and create the function. So there are few errors here, so it's type of. Okay, Okay, so what this code basically does is that the first time of the object instantiation, okay, so it will basically check if the type of about me is a function or not. By that time about me does not even exist, so this will be undefined. So what it will do is it will go and create a function, and it will be within the prototype. Okay, for the next object instantiation, that will not happen because it will get the type of about me. It will be a function, and since it is a function, this will not get executed. So your function gets created only once. Okay, so that's dynamic prototype, which basically means we are checking the type dynamically. Okay, we are checking the thing dynamically and doing that, right? So once you do that, let me get rid of all this. Okay, so the way you instantiate is very similar to a constructor method or a constructor pattern. So here you will say emp1 is nothing but new employee, and within the parameters you would pass three different values. So for example, two employee name is Ravi, and department name is IT. Okay, so that's how you would do it, and doing that will basically attach all your data to your employee object. And again, the way you would call is simply using the method. So you would just say emp1 dot about me. Okay, so this basically should get your data. Okay, so let me clear that and run the solution, and you see I get the data. So that's it with respect to the discussion of all the design, or rather I would say the most important design patterns within JavaScript. We have discussed about the factory pattern, the constructor pattern, prototype pattern, and dynamic prototype pattern. Okay, and I will see you in the next video on discussion of more advanced topics in JavaScript.